Good morning. This is Pastor Rick Bachman from the First United Church of Christ, coming to you on the last Sunday of March. I remember just a few weeks ago, we were the first Sunday of March, and I was joking with my congregation about March coming in like a lamb, and well, maybe it's going to have to go out like a lion. Well, this morning certainly feels that way. We had tornado warnings yesterday. It's cold, it's windy, and it's blustery out there. It feels miserable. And, I've always noticed that when the weather is not nice, folks' attitudes kind of fall into the same category. People get depressed, they get discouraged, and it just seems like we just don't like it. Which is fair enough. I don't know anybody that enjoys being in cold, wet, windy weather. But that being said, we do have reason for hope. I can assure you that before too awful long, I'm going to have to mow my yard. The grass is starting to get greener. It is starting to look more like spring. In a few weeks, we will start seeing sunshine and the chances to see a few flowers starting to bloom here and there. It is coming. And in this whole national crisis or world crisis that we face, this too is kind of depressing. It's kind of, the news has gotten worse. We've had more cases here in Marshalltown, Iowa, and it is appearing that, quite frankly, we're going to be in this for a longer haul than we had anticipated. We had been blessed by the fact that we had not had any cases in Marshall County, and to my knowledge, I think we have 2 or 3 now, and where I live in Hardin County, we've got 1. In fact, he's a good friend of mine, the pastor at the New Providence Honey Creek Church, Justin Weber, has been contracted with it. So it's striking closer to home all the time, and because it is starting to touch home with us, it's starting to get on our nerves. It's starting to try our patience. Being locked up seems to be getting a bit on everybody's frayed nerve. And throughout it, I find people questioning, is God still in charge? Is this going to be the end of us? Is this going to take me down a road I can't come up from? And I think the truth of it is, we're all getting tried in ways that we would prefer not to be. I know I'm seeing stretches in my life that I would just as soon not have to deal with, but that's life. And the truth of the matter is, no one, including God, ever promised us to have problem-free lives. So it is that occasionally we get into our Christian faith and we struggle with doubt. A big word that I think most of us would tell you that Christians aren't supposed to do. But the truth of it is, Christians are humans, and humans have doubts. So we're going to look at, the title of my message today is Help Me With My Unbelief. And some of you may already know where I'm headed with that. In Mark, we're going to talk about a man whose son was demon-possessed and came to Christ and wanted help. But before we get into the scripture, I want to talk about another crisis. A few years back, a country area was very rural, farm-oriented, and they were going through a drought. And it was getting severe. And so the community wanted to do something together, and so they decided to draw together for a prayer meeting. And on a certain evening at a certain time, pastor says, meet at my church and we will pray for rain. And as people wandered in and filtered in, they sat down in the pews, and they, as people do in a church, they sat back and they visited and talked and fretted about the weather and fretted about the lack of rain. And the pastor noticed one little girl sitting up front, and what was unusual about her was she brought this huge umbrella. They were coming to pray for rain, but only one little girl brought an umbrella. You see, while all those folks wanted and needed and hoped that God would bring them rain, only one little girl came prepared for that rain. And I think a little bit of that story resembles us. And I think too often I'm the guys in the back of the pews talking, fretting, while somebody sits up front with an umbrella. I want to start reading in Mark chapter 9, verses 20 through 30. And again, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. It says, "And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell to the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked his father, 'How long has this been happening to him?' And he said, 'From childhood. And it has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us.' Jesus said to him, 'If I can, all things are possible to the ones who believe.' Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, 'I believe, help my unbelief.' And when Jesus saw that the crowd were running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, 'You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out and never enter him again.' And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, 'He is dead.' But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, 'Why could we not cast it out?' And he said to them, 'This cannot be driven out by anything but prayer.'" Now, much like the congregation and the father of the boy, we often find our faith mixed with a mixture of, I believe in God because I know I'm supposed to, and yet there's a little bit of doubt. There's a little bit of fear. It's quite evident as we look at this pandemic. I see people acting and reacting in ways that it's obvious they're not acting out of faith, but out of fear. And to be honest with you, it's easy to fall into. Because oftentimes, especially in the church, we don't want to admit that we might have doubt, that we have fears, because it'll make us look a little less holy to all the other folks who seem to have it all together. And there's a little bit of a fun thing about that is that if you're looking around and seeing people that are all together, you ain't seeing it all, I can tell you. What I love about the Father is his honesty. He cares for his Son enough to not worry about what people think. He's honest to say, "I do believe, but help me with my unbelief." You see, I know you're doing great miracles, and those miracles suggest to me that you have power of God. But on the other hand, I'm fearful for my son. I don't know how many of us have been where we have been in a situation where we had to totally rely on God. I can tell you, I have seen the miracles of God. I can tell you that I have read in the scriptures time and time again how God did what he did for his people and how he delivered them out of almost impossible situations. And yet, there's still doubt. There's still disagreement. I don't know sometimes how it is that we do what we do and we still want to pretend that we don't have doubts. We want to take and act like, "Oh, I know God's got this. I know God's got this." But inside we're just in turmoil, wondering, does God got this? And this unbelief that they're referring to here, we got to go back to the Greek. The Greek word is apista, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correct for all you Greek experts, but it means disbelief, unfaithfulness, or unbelief. It is derived from apostas, which is a word where we get apostate, an infidel, a heathen, untrustworthy, an unbeliever. That sounds pretty serious, so no wonder we try to conceal it from others when we have doubts. But there are times, like with this father, where crisis leads us to say, you know what? Let's get off the little charade and let's quit pretending, and let's get real, because we need some real help here. I love the fact that Jesus does not condemn the Father. He clarifies what the Father is saying to make sure what the Father is saying is what he means. And I don't think it's because Jesus needed the clarification. I think the Father needed the clarification. Do you really believe I can do this? And the Father's answer was straightforward. I do believe you can. I just fear you won't or can't. And that honesty is refreshing to me, because Jesus did not condemn it. In fact, he just worked with it. He was willing to say, I'll take you where you're at. I'm willing to take the faith that you have and grow that faith. Doubt is a funny thing. We talked about fear a few days back, and fear can freeze you, and so can doubt. You can keep yourself so much in doubt that you will not reach out to Christ. This father could have become so doubtful, so fearful for being exposed for not having faith, that he simply stayed at home and didn't bring his son to be healed. How sad would that have been? How tragic. And I think for you and I today, that remains to be a question that we have to realize. Are we staying away from prayer because we're afraid? Because we have doubts? If so, we're missing something. We're missing a blessing. We're missing the ability to come to God, share with him our needs, our fears, and allow him to work with them. There's a story of a couple of guys in the desert, and they were come across a well, and beside the well was an old wooden bucket made out of slats, an old style bucket. And the bucket had sat out in the sun long enough that the slats had been dehydrated and they were gapped, and to be honest, there was daylight shining through them. This bucket was never going to hold water again. And the young fella was kind of discouraged, but the old fella says, yeah, give it time. Tied a rope on that bucket and threw it in the well. The young man was confused, but didn't say much. They went on their journey, and a few days later, they found themselves back at that same well. And the old man reeled up that bucket. After spending a couple days in the water, the wood had regained moisture, and the wood had swelled back out to its normal size, and the slats then did fill all the gaps. In fact, there was no leakage at all in that wooden bucket. That bucket needed to be immersed in water to bring it back to where it was supposed to be. My friends, you and I need to be immersed in faith in God. If we're not going to see the miracle that he can do in our lives. We are not going to see him work with our doubts, with our lack of faith. We can, and we do, face trying times, and we will continue to do. You just don't understand how we cannot go through our lives thinking that we can call ourselves Christians and yet not rely on God. Too often we see Christianity as something we did on Sunday morning, as an identity mark, like I belong to this club or I belong to that club. And the truth of the matter is, to be a Christian is a person who puts their faith and their doubts into Jesus Christ. They trust him more than they trust themselves. We need to be like that bucket. We need to be immersed in Jesus Christ. We cannot go through life filled with doubt, filled with anxiety, and call ourselves Christians. Because to be honest with you, God called us to live lives that were different from the world. Nothing will grow faith more than stretching our doubt for enough for God to touch it and heal it. You know, the truth of it is, being stretched is never easy. I doubt that father bringing that son there did it without a lot of anxiety, wondering what would or could happen, having his doubts, having his faith challenged by himself and perhaps by others. And the truth of it is, that's human nature to be there. There's a story of a fellow who went to his barber, and they got into a conversation, and the barber was an agnostic or an atheist, and he says, I don't believe God exists. How could God exist when there's so much suffering, so much trouble, so many things going wrong in this world? If God exists, he surely could and should change all that. And the young man sat in his chair for quite some time, not sure how to answer. And he kind of prayed about it, and got done and paid his barber and got up to leave. And just as he was getting ready to leave, a man walked by the front of the barber shop with long, straggly hair and a beard that was not trimmed. And the young man turned and says, you know, you've convinced me. But you've convinced me that I don't believe in barbers. And the barber looked at him kind of shocked. And he says, you're in a barber shop. I'm a barber. I just worked on you. How can you tell me there are no barbers? And he says, look at that man outside that window. Unshaved, unkempt hair, uncut hair. Surely if there were barbers, he wouldn't look like that. And the barber scoffed and says, you know, that's just not fair. For me to do something about it, he has to be willing to come into my shop, be willing to let me work on him. And the young man smiled and said, precisely. So it is with God. We see trouble and we see struggles around us, and we often blame God. But are we taking these things to God? Are the folks that are in the troubles seeking God? And the truth of the matter is, too often we're not. Too often we're letting our doubt keep us from coming to God. And again, God does not condemn us for having doubt. He does not require you to never question, never have a lapse in faith. You know, the truth of it is, he's looking for those words. Help me with my unbelief. In these struggling and hard times, many of you could easily say those words. This pandemic is beginning to get scary, and many of you are starting to experience fear in ways you have not experienced before. This is a time where we take it to our Father and say, help me. Lord, I believe you can handle it, but help me with my unbelief. We're not going to see an instantaneous change. We're not going to see God instantly deliver us, because that is part of the faith process. Just like Jesus, we are going to be challenged with the if I can question. Do you really believe I can? Do you have enough faith to trust me? Do you have enough faith to put your trust in over the fear that you have? I think so often in Jesus' life, he was confronted by the Pharisees and the Sadducees wanting to see miracles, wanting to see some of the miraculous signs that he was doing with the world. And they were always looking for the next magic show, if you will, to prove The irony is, they did see plenty of miracles. I often find it humorous because I used to say, boy, if I was in the Old Testament and I watched the miracles that happened to the Israelites in Egypt and throughout the desert, it would be so easy to believe because they saw so many miracles. The truth of the matter is, those very same Israelites sinned the most, failed the most in faith, and probably had more doubts than even we do today. How can that be? Well, the truth of the matter is, miracles do not prove God. Never have, never will. Now, does that mean God won't do them? No, He does still do miracles. But if you're looking for a miracle to prove God's presence, you will be disappointed because you will find some other reason for that miracle. Jesus did not go around proving himself. Rather, he went around looking for people in need, like this father, who had faith, but also had doubt, and was willing to be open and honest and say, Lord, I believe, but help me with my unbelief. We need to be like that bucket in that story, soaked in God, for that faith to be strong. If I'm not solid in my walk, if I'm not in my scripture, if I'm not in prayer, it's going to be difficult to trust in an unseen God. But if I am trusting, if I am willing to put my faith in him, my friends, you will find, like that father, that he will answer those prayers. We are in a trying time. The truth of it is, I do not know. I wish I could say we've hit rock bottom and that we're headed back up. I'll be honest with you, I'm an old cop. And the old cop in me suggests we have not hit rock bottom yet. With all the situations going on, with the fact that we're getting more and more virus hits, and they're now in our own county, friends, I think we've got a ways to go. In fact, I firmly believe this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Does that mean I have no hope? Does it mean my faith is shaken? No. You see, whatever is to come, God is still on his throne. My friends, if I have 50 minutes left on this world, I know where I'm going. If I have 50 years left on this world, I know where I'm going. The only difference is how much time will I spend serving God. I'll tell you the truth. We live in crazy times. But it is these crazy, challenging times that oftentimes turns us, perhaps even coerces us, to realize our need for God. If today you are struggling with unbelief and fear and anxiety, don't spend another minute wasting your life away with those emotions. Get on your knees and say, Lord, if you can, help me. And if you're quiet, and if you're sincere, don't be surprised if in the back of your head you hear a voice say, if I can. You see, Jesus Christ is as much willing to heal today as he was back then. He is just as capable. He can get us through all the dilemmas that we face, just like he did back then. My God is not any weaker today than he was 2,000 years ago. He can, and he does, still hear and listen and answer prayer. My friends, let's go to prayer. Let's be in prayer for each other, for ourselves, for our families. Let us go through this crisis and let us come out on the other side of it stronger, healthier, and with more trust in God than we went into it with. Thank you, and have a God blessed day.